All right, welcome back to another edition of the HoosierIllustrated.com Indiana basketball postgame wrap-up show. John Alden from In Touch with Indiana Sports, along with basketball recruiting analyst Kyler Staley, also the host of Talking About the Hoosiers with Drew Rosenberg. Hoosiers coming off an 82-67 Big Ten Conference opening victory, and in my opinion, this is probably the most complete performance we've seen all year from Indiana. And maybe that's not saying much, considering this is only game number 10, right? But I feel like we've been talking a lot about, the same old story, same old Indiana basketball that we've seen in the last couple of seasons. And I'm not saying that they evolved into something totally different tonight, but with what they have, I feel like they maxed out probably what they want to get out of a lot of their best players tonight. Kyler, I'll hand it over to you to get your initial thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely something you can say. I think, it's only a 15-point win, and obviously they've had much larger margins of victory against other teams. But when you just look at what they were doing on the floor, I mean, it was just night and day from what we've seen. The big word for me is just hustle. I think that's what Indiana played with. They were hustling for loose balls. I go back to that Omar Ballo dive for the ball at the very beginning of the game. Very, very impressive. You saw guys like, Cannon Carlisle, Miles Rice getting on the floor, all those guys. I mean, just hustling and getting back on defense and, making things difficult for Minnesota to score. Because let's be honest with you, Minnesota's just not a very good team right now. And I think Indiana's obviously played better teams so far this year versus Minnesota, and they got a lot to figure out. The one stat I look at right now is Minnesota goes 2 of 11 from three, and I can't think of a team that Indiana has played so far that hasn't at least shot 20-plus threes. So for them to be able to do that, I mean, that may not be Minnesota's offensive game plan. It certainly didn't look like it. It looked like a lot of ISO Daniel Garcia a lot of times. But, just the fact that Indiana continues to show their balance. Omar Ballo having another big night, 18 points, 7 rebounds, and then obviously Malik doing his thing, 16 points. Mackenzie Mbago, 13 points. Bryson Tucker and Cannon Carlisle, I think we got to talk about them because those guys coming off the bench tonight, Carlisle's been fighting. I think he missed 3 games before this game, but, fighting an injury and coming back, just being that spark off the bench, and Bryson Tucker playing within himself, I thought was just great. And he's playing aggressive and just feeding off of that energy and just really building the energy that Indiana needed. You got to give major props to those guys because I think, you can look at Omar Ballo, Malik Renew, Mackenzie Mbago. I think the 2 best players tonight, just for what they were able to do, was Cannon Carlisle and Bryson Tucker.
Yeah, and back to Bryson Tucker specifically, career highs in points and rebounds, 16 points and 6 rebounds. And this is also coming off of right before this, probably one of his worst performances of the season. So it's nice to see him bounce back. And again, he's been a very impactful player for Indiana off the bench all season long. He's not going to be expected to be the star of the show, but whenever you can have especially multiple guys coming off the bench, you included Cannon Carlisle tonight as well. He's normally somebody who would be in the starting rotation, but of course with those injuries, that wasn't the case. But when you have 2 guys that are that impactful, along with whenever you're getting regular contributions from your starters, I mean, that's always going to be a recipe for success, whether it's an Indiana team or not. Anybody would love to get good contributions from a couple of their bench players. And I'm not saying Indiana has to hope for that every single game, but if you can have 1 sixth man, I mean, on the rare occasion like we got tonight, you got 2 of them that combine for a total of 30 points. If you can regularly get a Bryson Tucker, or maybe another night it's a Luke Goody, somebody else to be an extra contributor, that's only going to make their chances at being amongst the best of the Big Ten that much greater.
And especially nice to see when you see guys like Bryson Tucker, and I know Cannon's been starting when he's been healthy, but like seeing those guys come off the bench, especially when you look at Trey Galloway didn't have the best of night. He didn't look comfortable on the floor tonight, and just something was off with Trey tonight. And every player's going to have that. And the starters throughout the season, there's going to be times where Malik Renew is not having the best night. Mackenzie Mbago, Omar Ballo, having a guy coming off the bench like Bryson Tucker did tonight and Cannon, like that just helps out tremendously, and it shows you the depth that Indiana has. So once they figure out, their balance, which it's already there, in my opinion, once they continue to fine-tune that a little bit more, I think they're going to be one of the more deeper teams, which they already kind of are in the Big Ten. I think that just makes them extremely dangerous. So when they're playing locked in like they were on defense, in the second half there was a little bit of a couple of lapses. You thought that they should have definitely won by 20-plus, but you take a 15-point win. But like once they start just consistently locking in on defense, this team's going to really skyrocket. I really believe so.
Another thing I want to point out, Umar Ballo, 8 for 11 from the free throw line. I feel like that was, especially on the broadcast tonight, I know you were there in person, so you weren't listening to the announcers, but they talked a lot about just from season to season, Umar Ballo's struggles at the free throw line, but tonight specifically, and I know he's probably never going to be perfect, but to see him go 8 for 11 whenever he historically has been, I mean, most guys who are that big and they're shooting free throws, you're lucky if you get 1 for 2 out of them. But to see him go 8 for 11, that just shows that all the work that Calbert Chaney is doing with him to kind of work on his simple, almost said his footwork, but it's his shot, of course, from the free throw line. But to see him take a step like that, I mean, that's going to be crucial in late game situations whenever you're not up by 15 points. And maybe Umar Ballo isn't the guy that Indiana is going to want the ball in his hands, but in situations where he is the guy at the line, unfortunately, it'll be nice to know that maybe he's not as much of a liability at the line as maybe you would have expected in previous seasons.
I mean, honestly, at the beginning of the year, yeah, I probably would have considered Umar Bello a liability, and I just would have probably accepted that. But I feel pretty comfortable getting Umar Bello on the line at this point because I don't know what his percentage is off the top of my head when it comes to the season, but it's obviously improved. And, if he's a guy that's, going 2 for 2, 1 out of every 3 times or whatever, at least hitting 1 free throw, you'll take that. And I think tonight, overall, Indiana left a lot of points at the free throw line. They only finished 18 of 29. Trey Galloway went 0 for 2 at one point. Malik Renew missed a couple, So this team's been very, very good as a free throw shooting team. A lot better than previous seasons, especially last season, because it was almost a dread when you would see them go to the line. Now it's just like it's one of their strengths, and they take advantage of that. But Umar Ballo, Mike Wilson's mentioned it. He wants to feature Umar a lot more, and that was obviously a given because when you look back at Umar Ballo's career at Gonzaga, especially at Arizona, he wasn't really the featured guy a lot of times. Yeah, he's the biggest guy. He stood out in that area, but wasn't really featured in the offense. Not saying that he's going to be super featured in the offense, but Indiana's going to use him a lot more versus his time at Arizona or Gonzaga. They just are, and they've shown that. And Umar Bello continued to just be very consistent, continuing to be the best rebounder on this team. Come Big Ten time, it's just a team that's going to be really, really dangerous. I'm telling you.
Looking ahead to Friday, of course, we've talked about the importance of Indiana going to Nebraska and what is likely to be a very difficult environment. Of course, a team that's kind of had Indiana's number, at least when you think about last season. Not only did they sweep them in the regular season, they knocked them out of the Big Ten tournament. So not beating them 3 out of 3 times last year. And I know you don't have Keisei Tominaga. We talked about that last time.
Thank you.
Still, yeah. I mean, it may not make that much of a. You have Connor Esigian instead, and a whole other cast of characters that Indiana is going to figure out a way to stop. How do you think Indiana will be able to carry forward momentum going on the road this Friday?
Well, this game is definitely a step in the right direction. I think there's a lot that you build off of this game. But, playing on the road, this will be Indiana's first true road test. Bahamas doesn't really count as a neutral site if there ever was one. So going on the road against a team that you have struggled with, Nebraska is not really the Nebraska of old where we used to be like it was an easy win all the time or whatever. They're tough. They're coached really, really well. And I know they just got smoked by Michigan State by like 30, 40 points. But don't get fooled. You can't take this lightly. Going on the road, especially in a Big Ten conference game, it doesn't have to be pretty. It really doesn't. On the road, you just got to figure out a way to win, and that's what Indiana's got to do. But this was a good game to build off of. I think they have a lot of momentum. Just carry that momentum, have a really good week of practice, stay healthy, and then we'll see what happens. Nebraska is a team that Indiana can beat, most certainly. They definitely outmatch them when it comes to talent, but it's all in the mental. It's just all about competing on defense and making the little plays, just finding ways to win. And hopefully, if Indiana does get that win, obviously they'll start off 2-0, Big Ten play, finish out the non-conference schedule in the month of December, then get right back into Big Ten play.
Again, Hoosiers get the 82-67 victory against Minnesota to open up conference play tonight, moving to 8-2 on the season, 1-0, of course, in the Big Ten. They will move on this Friday to face Nebraska, as we just mentioned. 8 p.m. tip on Fox. I believe we're going to try to do another post-game wrap-up, right? It might be a late-night edition of the post-game wrap-up, but I do believe we'll be here for you. Am I right, Kyler?
Absolutely. I'll never leave the fans. Never.
I do. While you mentioned fans real quick, I saw somebody took a photo of the of the crowd tonight? Was it pretty sparse?
No, I thought it was. I think people kind of overreact when the start of the game happens because they're like, oh, look at all these empty seats. But like by the time the first media timeout it starts to fill up. The student section was great tonight. Really, really good for a conference. And I thought there was for a Monday at 6:30 p.m. A lot of people are getting off work. I thought it was actually pretty good. So give credit to the Indiana fans. They really showed out tonight. And they also had John Mellencamp and
I saw that.
Pacers players Benedict Mathurin and Nimhard were also here. So you gotta give it. The stars were out tonight.
The stars were out, and Indiana amongst them, at least the Hoosiers part of the stardom tonight as well. Again, we'll be back on Friday for another edition of the post-game wrap-up show. Until then, in touch with Indiana sports, you can check out today's show, or also we'll have more coming up on Wednesday and Friday, and then talking about the Hoosiers on Thursday as well. Plenty of awesome content throughout HoosierIllustrated.com. Check out everything that our boy Kyler Staley's writing. Dylan Traeger, Alec Lasley, Drew Rosenberg, the best cast of characters around amongst the entire Indiana beat. What more could you ask for, right? So check out all of that. Subscribe to Hoosier Illustrated on YouTube as well, and we'll be back again for another edition of the post-game wrap-up show late on Friday night. So until then, we'll talk to you next time.